I was 14 when I learned to save, not from ambition but from necessity. Robert and Linda made it abundantly clear at my 14th birthday dinner, right after the grocery store cake, that the moment I turned 18, I'd either pay rent or find somewhere else to live. Robert said I needed to grasp that nothing came without cost, especially living in their home, so I started working at a chain restaurant, bussing tables, tucking away cash in a locked drawer. $20 some weeks, $50 when I could grab extra shifts. I flattened the bills inside a hollowed-out textbook, locked it away. By 19, I'd accumulated $9,300, my escape fund. I had apartment listings circled, deposits calculated. Just one more week. Then I woke up one Thursday to find my desk drawer demolished. Someone had taken a crowbar to it while I slept. The lock dangled from splintered wood on my floor. The hollowed textbook sat empty on my bed. In the kitchen, Robert drank coffee like any other morning. Linda sat at the table, counting my money out loud. When I asked what they were doing, Robert laughed. "Everything in this house belongs to us," he said. "Including you." Linda kept counting, announcing that $9,300 barely covered what I owed for existing. When I protested, Robert called me a parasite. Said the money was going toward 5 years of back rent. Linda added that I'd been living rent-free since birth and they were done funding my lifestyle. I was 19. Working 30 hours weekly while finishing high school. And they called me a parasite. Here's what you need to understand about Robert and Linda. They weren't struggling. Robert managed a manufacturing department. Linda worked medical billing. They had money, but they operated under a philosophy that children were investments requiring dividends. They genuinely believed having kids created a debt from birth, not just helping around the house, but actual financial obligation. At 16, Linda had shown me a handwritten ledger. Every diaper, every meal, every school supply, even portions of mortgage and utilities. By age 16, she'd calculated I'd cost them approximately $147,000. Most parents are too soft to track such things, she'd said, but I needed to understand my situation. I owed them. Eventually, I'd have to pay. I smiled when they took my money. Packed a backpack, left that afternoon. No arguments, no tears, no begging. I crashed on a friend's couch, then borrowed money from my friend Marcus to secure a studio apartment. Repaid him in 3 months working 2 jobs. At 19, I was free, but I wasn't just angry. I was calculating. That rage didn't soften into acceptance. It crystallized, grew sharper. I fed it daily for 5 years. Every decision served one goal, being perfectly positioned when they inevitably came crawling back. Because people like Robert and Linda always do. I worked through community college, transferred for my bachelor's degree, found a logistics job with decent pay, lived in the same small studio for 3 years, drove an aging sedan I maintained myself, packed lunches, funneled every spare dollar into savings and investments. By 23, I'd rebuilt what they'd stolen, and more. By 24, I was doing better than both of them combined, and I waited. I knew the call would come. Robert and Linda lived beyond their means constantly. New cars every few years, furniture on credit, half-finished home improvement projects financed and abandoned. They performed prosperity while drowning. The first contact came 8 months ago. Saturday morning, hardware store, phone ringing from a number dormant for 5 years. Linda's voice came through warm and friendly, asking how I'd been, suggesting lunch sometime. I asked what she actually wanted. The warmth evaporated. They were experiencing financial difficulties. Needed help with expenses, temporary assistance just until they stabilized. Maybe $1,000 or $2,000 for the mortgage. The least I could do after everything they'd done for me. I laughed out loud in the hardware aisle. Told Linda I remembered exactly what they'd done, especially that Thursday morning 5 years ago. She went quiet. Said it had been a misunderstanding. They'd planned to return the money, just needed to borrow it for an emergency. Car repairs, she claimed, then she pivoted. I was being petty, holding grudges, acting like a child. Family helps family. I was being selfish. Robert grabbed the phone. Said I needed to grow up, stop playing victim. They'd raised me, fed me, sheltered me. If I couldn't spare a few thousand, I was exactly the parasite they'd always known I was. I said no. Simple as that. Hung up. The calls continued. Different numbers every few days. Linda leaving disappointed voicemails. Robert texting about destroying the family. I blocked everything. Then came emails. Long messages about mortgage troubles, car repairs, medical bills. Everyone ended asking how I could be so cruel to my own parents. I deleted them all. and it felt magnificent. Every ignored call, every deleted email, every blocked number was victory. This was what I'd prepared for. Them desperate, cornered, powerless, while I held everything. 3 months ago, things intensified. Marcus called, saying Linda had reached him through social media. She was worried about me, confused why I'd cut them off completely, asking if Marcus could help me understand that family mattered. She just wanted to reconcile, didn't understand my hostility. Marcus, bless him, told her he knew exactly why I wasn't talking to them. Maybe they should reflect on past behavior. But the fact they'd tracked down my friends to manipulate me showed increasing desperation. Then my Uncle Daniel called, Robert's younger brother. Decent guy, never particularly close. Robert and Linda had asked him for money. When he declined, they complained about their ungrateful son who refused to help. Daniel wanted the real story because their version sounded wrong. I told him everything. The childhood savings, the rent demands, the crowbar, the theft, the mockery, all of it. Daniel went quiet, then said he'd had no idea. Robert had always been obsessed with money and debt and who owed what, but Daniel hadn't known it extended to treating his own child like a debtor. He wouldn't give them money, didn't blame me for cutting them off. But Daniel also mentioned their situation was worse than I'd realized. 4 months behind on mortgage payments. They'd taken a second mortgage 3 years ago for kitchen renovations, struggled with payments since. Car repossessed 2 months prior. Linda fired from her billing job over some error or fraud issue. Robert's hours cut at the plant. They were in serious trouble. And according to their calculations, I was their best rescue option. After all, they'd spent $147,000 on me by age 16, probably $200,000 by the time I left at 19. In their minds, I owed them. The theft was irrelevant because that money had belonged to them anyway. Everything under their roof belonged to them. The voicemails grew aggressive. Linda saying I'd regret abandoning family when I was old and alone. Robert threatening to sue me for elder abuse. They were 52 and 54. The entitlement was breathtaking. Last week, Linda appeared at my apartment building. No idea how she found my address, but she waited by the entrance when I returned from work Thursday evening. She looked rough, thinner, older, exhausted. Tried to hug me. I stepped back. She said we needed to talk. This had gone too far. I was her son. She loved me. Couldn't I just hear her out? I said I had nothing to say. She started crying. The bank was foreclosing. 60 days to produce missed payments or lose everything. I had money now. She knew I did. Couldn't I help just once? She promised they'd repay me. Swore they'd changed. Understood they'd made mistakes when I was younger. I asked if she remembered counting my money at the kitchen table. She stopped crying. I asked if she remembered calling me a parasite. If she remembered saying $9,300 barely covered what I owed for existing. She said those were different times. They'd been under financial stress. Couldn't I move past it? I told her I had moved past it. Moved past it the day I walked out at 19. Moved past it by building a life they had no part in. And I had absolutely no intention of giving them a single dollar. She called me heartless. Said I was destroying my own parents over ancient history. Hoped I'd experience the same betrayal someday so I'd understand how my attitude hurt them. I went inside and locked the door. She stood outside another 20 minutes before leaving. The subsequent voicemails have been unhinged, sobbing, screaming, threats, guilt trips. Robert's latest said they'd tell everyone what a monster I am. Linda said I was destroying them. She'd never forgive me. They alternate between begging and threatening, between lawsuit promises and predictions of having nothing, and I'm not budging. Not 1 inch, not $1. They made their choices. Chose to treat me like property, like a debtor. Chose to steal from a 19-year-old who'd saved every penny from years of work. Chose to mock me, call me a parasite while counting my cash. Now they live with those choices. I spent 5 years preparing for this exact moment, and I'm savoring every second of it. Update 1, all right, strap in, because the situation with Robert and Linda has completely derailed. For everyone who predicted they'd escalate and drag other family members in, you were absolutely right. But I underestimated just how desperate they'd become. After Linda appeared at my apartment, I thought maybe she'd finally understood. I was wrong. 3 days later, my phone exploded with calls from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. Cousins I barely knew existed. Robert's other brother, Victor, 2 states away. even Linda's sister Patricia, whom I'd met maybe twice in my entire life. Patricia called first Sunday morning while I did laundry. Started sweet and concerned, asking how I was, saying she'd heard from Linda that we weren't talking. Such a shame when families grew apart. Maybe we could work things out. I asked what exactly Linda had told her. Patricia grew uncomfortable. Something vague about a misunderstanding years ago. How sometimes parents and kids clash. But family is forever. I asked specifically if Linda mentioned stealing. $9,300 from me, while I slept. Dead silence. Then Patricia said Linda had explained. They'd borrowed some money during difficult times, and there'd been a miscommunication about repayment. A miscommunication. They demolished my locked desk with a crowbar, stole my emergency fund, then mocked me. But sure, miscommunication. I told Patricia the real story. Every detail, including the ledger of everything I allegedly owed for being born. Patricia tried backtracking. Didn't know all the details. Surely we could find middle ground. I told her there was no middle ground. Hung up. Victor called next. More direct than Patricia. Robert had asked him for money. He'd declined. But Robert claimed I was refusing to help, despite apparently having plenty. Victor wanted to know if that was true, and if so, why. At least he asked, instead of lecturing. I laid it all out. The savings. The theft. Years of being told I was a financial burden who owed compensation for existing. Victor listened. When I finished, he said he'd always known Robert had strange ideas about money and debt, but hadn't realized it was that extreme. Then he asked what I planned to do if they actually lost their house. I said they'd lose their house. Simple as that. He asked if I could live with that. I said I'd been living with the memory of their theft for 5 years, so yes, I could handle it. Victor said he understood, but it was still difficult. I appreciated that he wasn't guilt-tripping me, though I could tell he was uncomfortable. The worst call came from my cousin Jennifer, Robert's niece, about 5 years older than me. We'd gotten along okay when I was younger. She called Tuesday evening while I shopped for groceries and immediately launched into a speech about how disappointed she was. Family takes care of family. I was being incredibly selfish. Robert and Linda were good people who'd made one mistake years ago, and I was punishing them forever. I stopped in the pasta aisle and asked Jennifer if she'd help. Someone who'd stolen from her. She said that was different because Robert and Linda were my parents. I asked her to explain how being related gave someone permission to steal. She said I was twisting things, being difficult. They'd raised me, fed me. I wouldn't exist without them. The least I could do was help when they struggled, and there it was. The same logic Robert and Linda had used my entire life. Children are investments. Children owe parents for being born. Jennifer had bought in completely. I told her if she felt so strongly, she should give them money herself. She said she had her own family to support, couldn't afford to help. I said that was convenient. Hung up. But here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly satisfying in a twisted way. All these family members weren't calling from concern. Robert and Linda had specifically contacted each of them, spinning stories about being financially abused by their ungrateful son. They'd told everyone they'd loaned me money to help me start out, and now that they needed help, I refused to even talk to them. Daniel called Wednesday and explained this. He'd talked to Victor and Patricia, compared notes. They'd all been told slightly different versions. In Linda's version to Patricia, they'd helped pay for my college. In Robert's version to Victor, they'd co-signed an apartment lease and covered my rent for 6 months. None of it was true. But they were working hard to turn the family against me, so I did something I'd been planning. I wrote a detailed email explaining exactly what happened, dates, specifics, and sent it to every family member who'd contacted me. Daniel, Victor, Patricia, Jennifer, and several others. I explained Linda's ledger. The demands to pay rent at 18, 5 years of saving. The crowbar, the theft, the mockery. I explained I'd left with nothing, rebuilt my life with zero family help except Marcus lending me first month's rent. And I explained I'd been waiting 5 years for Robert and Linda to face consequences, and I wasn't going to rescue them. The responses were mixed. Daniel said he'd figured as much, supported my decision. Victor said it was my choice, he wasn't getting involved further. Patricia didn't respond. Jennifer sent back a nasty message calling me vindictive and cruel, saying I'd regret this someday. Other relatives I barely knew said family drama wasn't their business, but the best part? Robert and Linda found out I'd sent the email and lost it. Robert called from a number I hadn't blocked yet, absolutely screaming about spreading lies, destroying their reputation, turning the family against them. I told him I wasn't spreading lies. I was spreading truth. And if truth destroyed their reputation, maybe their reputation deserved destruction. He said I had no idea what I'd done. They had lawyers who could sue for defamation. I laughed. Told him defamation required lies and everything I'd written was completely true. Then asked how they planned to afford a lawyer when they couldn't afford their mortgage payment. He hung up. Linda left a voicemail an hour later, crying, saying I was killing her. The stress was affecting her health. If anything happened, it would be my fault. I'd poisoned the family against them. Now nobody would help. They'd end up on the street. She'd given birth to me, raised me, and this was how I repaid her. I saved the voicemail. Been saving all of them, actually, just in case. Thursday night, things escalated again. I was leaving my apartment to meet Marcus for dinner, and Robert was sitting in a borrowed sedan parked across the street. Recognized him immediately despite the darkness. He got out when he saw me, started walking toward me. I stopped and waited. Running felt like giving him power. I wasn't willing to surrender. He looked terrible. Unshaven, rumpled clothes like he hadn't slept in days. Said we needed to talk. I needed to listen. This had gone far enough. I said I didn't need to do anything and started walking. He followed, talking the whole time. I was being childish, holding grudges over something from half a decade ago. Everyone makes mistakes. I was acting like they'd committed some unforgivable crime when all they'd done was borrow money from their own son. I stopped walking. Turned around. Asked if he remembered what he said the morning I found my desk destroyed. He said he didn't remember every conversation from 5 years ago. I told him I remembered perfectly. Him laughing, saying everything under their roof belonged to them, including me. Linda counting my cash out loud, saying it barely covered what I owed. Calling me a parasite. Robert said those were just words. I was being too sensitive. They'd been frustrated, under financial pressure, said things they didn't mean. I asked if the crowbar was just words too. If stealing $9,300 was just words. He said I needed to understand their perspective. Raising a kid was expensive. They'd sacrificed a lot. I told him I'd spent 5 years understanding their perspective. Understood perfectly. They viewed me as property, a debtor. Genuinely believed I owed them for being born. Now they faced financial ruin and wanted me to bail them out because in their minds I was still obligated to pay off my debt. Robert said that wasn't fair. Of course they loved me, wanted what was best, but I needed to understand money was tight. They'd needed that cash for an emergency. I asked what the emergency was. He stammered. Something about car repairs. I reminded him Linda had told me the same lie months ago. I still didn't believe it. Then he changed tactics completely. Fine, maybe they'd handled things badly 5 years ago, but this was different. About losing their house, having nowhere to go. I had money to help, was choosing not to out of spite. What kind of person lets their own parents become homeless? I said the kind whose own parents stole their emergency fund while they slept. Then I walked away. Robert shouted after me. I'd regret this. They'd tell everyone what I was doing. I'd end up old and alone because I was so heartless. I met Marcus at the diner, told him everything. Marcus has been my friend since high school, lent me money when I left Robert and Linda's house. He knows the whole history. He asked if I felt guilty at all. I said no, honestly. I'd played this scenario in my head 1,000 times over 5 years. Now that it was happening, it felt exactly like I thought it would. Satisfying. Marcus said he didn't blame me, but asked what my end game was. What was I hoping would happen? I told him I wanted them to lose everything. Wanted them to experience the same panic and helplessness I'd felt at 19. Wanted them to understand what it felt like to have someone with power over you just take what they wanted and laugh about it. He asked if I'd feel different if they actually ended up on the street. I said no. They made choices. Chose to treat me the way they did. Chose to steal. Chose to build a lifestyle they couldn't afford. Now they faced consequences. And I wasn't saving them from consequences they'd earned. Friday morning, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, final notice. Opened it expecting spam. It was from Robert. He'd created a new email specifically to contact me since I'd blocked everything else. The email was long, detailed, basically a point-by-point rebuttal of everything I'd sent the family. Claimed they'd never kept a ledger. I was misremembering or exaggerating. Claimed they'd never demanded rent at 18. I'd offered myself. Claimed the money from my desk was money they'd given me originally, so technically they were just taking back what was theirs. Claimed they'd never called me a parasite. I was making it up to make them look bad. Every single thing was a lie. The email ended with a threat. If I didn't agree to help within the week, they'd be forced to take legal action. They had documentation proving I owed them money, would sue for it. I could either help voluntarily or through court order, but either way, I'd be helping. I forwarded the email to Daniel with a note asking if Robert had completely lost his mind. Daniel called an hour later. Robert and Linda were in full panic mode. Foreclosure date set for 5 weeks out. They'd already moved most furniture into a storage unit they could barely afford. Asking everyone they knew for money, getting turned down. Apparently, Linda had been going around their neighborhood telling people their son had abandoned them in their time of need. Crying to neighbors about not understanding what she'd done wrong, why I hated them so much, playing the victim hard. I don't care. Let her play victim. Let Robert fabricate documentation. Let them tell everyone I'm a monster. I know what happened. They know what happened. And the truth is, I've been preparing for this for 5 years. They have no idea what's coming, because here's what Robert and Linda don't know yet. I'm not just refusing to help them. I have plans. Plans I've been working on since I was 20 years old. Plans that are going to make everything so much worse for them. The reckoning. When I left at 19, I wasn't just angry about the theft. I was angry about the entire philosophy behind it. The ledger, the itemized list of everything I allegedly owed for existing. The genuine belief that I was their property, their investment. I knew 2 things for certain. 1, they would eventually need money and come to me. 2, when that happened, I wanted to be in a position to ensure they got nothing, so I started documenting everything. Wrote down every detail about the theft, the ledger, the rent demands, the things they'd said. Kept the text messages from the weeks after I left calling me selfish and ungrateful. Kept every email, every voicemail, everything. Created a folder labeled Family History, backed up in 3 places. But more importantly, I started tracking their financial patterns. I knew Robert and Linda spent money they didn't have. Watched them do it my entire childhood. So I started checking public records for their property. Found out about the second mortgage the year after I left. Found out when they refinanced. Tracked every lien, every property tax payment, every piece of publicly available financial information. And I waited. I built my own financial stability specifically so I'd have resources and high ground when they eventually came crawling back. Every dollar saved was ammunition. Every promotion was leverage. I wasn't just living my life. I was preparing for war. When Linda called 8 months ago asking for money, I knew exactly how much trouble they were in before she even explained. I'd been monitoring their mortgage status. Knew they were behind on payments. Knew their car had been repossessed. Knew they were desperate. And I said no because that was the plan. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them feel what I felt at 19. But here's where it gets interesting. Remember that email I sent to all the family members? That wasn't just about clearing the air. That was strategic. See, Robert and Linda's backup plan was leaning on family for money. They were already working on Daniel and Victor and Patricia and everyone else. My email cut off that avenue. I made sure every single person who might help them knew exactly what they'd done and why I wasn't helping. Some people asked why I cared if other family members helped them. Wouldn't that solve their problem without involving me? Yes, but that's not the point. The point is they treated me like property. Told me everything under their roof belonged to them, including me. Stole from me, mocked me, called me a parasite. Now I want them to lose everything. Not just fail to get my money, everything. So I've been systematically ensuring nobody helps them. After sending the email to the family, I followed up individually with sympathetic ones. Sent Daniel copies of the text messages Robert sent 5 years ago. Sent Victor a detailed timeline of every lie they'd told him. Made sure everyone had complete information. It worked. Daniel told me last week Robert had called again begging for money. Daniel said no. Victor told Robert the same. Patricia stopped responding to Linda's messages entirely. One by one, I watched their support system collapse. But Robert and Linda didn't give up. They never do. Sunday afternoon, I was at the gym when Linda showed up again. Don't know how she keeps finding me, but I think she's just driving around looking for my car. Walking out to the parking lot, there she was, leaning against a borrowed sedan. She looked worse than before. Thinner, definitely not sleeping, wearing clothes that looked unwashed. She said she needed 5 minutes. I said she could have 2, and I wasn't moving from the parking lot. She said they had 3 weeks until foreclosure was final. They'd tried everything to come up with the money. Nobody would help. I asked why she thought that was. She said I'd poisoned everyone against them with my lies. I corrected her. I'd informed everyone of the truth. They'd made their own decisions. She said I was being petty, vindictive, destroying them over ancient history. I told her it had been 5 years, not ancient history. I remembered every detail like yesterday. Then Linda did something surprising. She said she was sorry. They'd been wrong to take my money, wrong to say those things. Genuinely sorry for hurting me. For a second, I almost wondered if she meant it. Then she said, since she'd apologized, maybe we could move forward and I could help them. There it was. The apology wasn't real remorse, just another tactic, another manipulation attempt to get money. I asked if she'd be apologizing if she wasn't about to lose her house. She didn't answer. Asked if she'd have ever apologized if she didn't need something from me. She said that wasn't fair. People apologize when they realize they've made mistakes. I told her she didn't realize she'd made a mistake. She realized she was facing consequences, completely different things. She started crying, said I was twisting everything. She was trying to fix things and I wouldn't let her. I told her there was nothing to fix because I wasn't interested in having any relationship with her or Robert ever again. She grabbed my arm. Said I was her son, she loved me, didn't that mean anything? I pulled away. Said it meant exactly as much as it had when she was counting my stolen money at the kitchen table. She said I'd regret this for the rest of my life. I said I doubted it and walked to my car. She was still standing there crying when I drove away. That evening, Robert called from yet another new number. I answered because at this point, the conversations are just entertainment. He said Linda had told him about our talk. He wanted to try a different approach. Forget the past. Forget everything that happened. This was about basic human decency. They faced homelessness. I had the ability to prevent it. Wasn't that the right thing, regardless of history? I asked if he thought it was the right thing when he broke into my desk with a crowbar. He said that was different. I asked how. He said they were my parents. They'd been desperate. I needed to understand their position. I said I understood perfectly. They'd been in a position where they had power over me and used that power to take what they wanted. Now I was in a position where I had power over them and was using that power to refuse what they wanted. Exactly the same dynamic, just reversed. Robert went quiet for a long moment, then said I was choosing to be cruel. Cruelty was a choice and I was making the wrong one. I told him stealing from your sleeping child was also a choice, and he'd made that one enthusiastically. He said I sounded like I was enjoying this. I said yes, absolutely. I'd been waiting 5 years for this exact scenario, and it was exceeding my expectations. He asked what it would take for me to help them. What did they need to do to earn my assistance? I said there was nothing they could do because I didn't want them to earn it. I wanted them to lose everything. Wanted them to experience the same helplessness and desperation I'd felt at 19. He said that was sick. I needed therapy. I said that was rich coming from someone who kept a ledger of everything their child owed them for being born. Then Robert said something that made me realize he still didn't get it. He said they'd provided food, shelter, clothing, education. All of that cost money. It wasn't unreasonable to expect some return on that investment. He was still talking about me like an investment. Like property, like something he owned that should generate profit. After everything that had happened, after all the conversations and confrontations, he still genuinely believed he had the right to financial compensation for being my parent. I told him I hoped he remembered those words when he was packing up the house. Hoped he remembered he'd valued me in dollars and calculated what I owed him. Now he was getting the exact relationship he'd created. 2 weeks later, the foreclosure went through. Daniel called to let me know Robert and Linda had officially lost the house last Thursday. They'd moved what possessions they could into that storage unit. Everything else got sold or abandoned. They're staying with Patricia now, sleeping on an air mattress in her spare room. Patricia apparently felt sorry for them after seeing them show up with everything they owned crammed into trash bags. Daniel said they're broken. Linda hardly speaks. Robert sits around all day staring at nothing. Patricia told Daniel they cry a lot. Part of me expected to feel something when I heard this. Guilt, maybe, or satisfaction, or vindication, but I don't feel much of anything. Just quiet. They taught me that everything had a price, that relationships were transactions, that love was conditional on debt being paid, and I learned the lesson perfectly. They wanted me to understand that nothing in life was free, especially not living under their roof. Well, I understand. I understand so well that I applied their exact philosophy right back to them. They can't claim I'm being unfair. I'm being exactly what they trained me to be. The difference is, I'm better at it than they ever were. Marcus asked me last night if I was happy now that it's over. If I felt like I'd won, I told him it was never about winning. It was about consequences. It was about people reaping what they sowed. They planted seeds of cruelty and calculation. They watered them with contempt and theft. And now, they're harvesting exactly what they grew. Maybe someday they'll understand that when you treat your own child like a debtor, when you break into their desk with a crowbar and steal their future, when you count their money at the kitchen table and call them a parasite, maybe then you forfeit the right to expect mercy when your own life falls apart. Or maybe they'll never understand. Maybe they'll go to their graves believing they were good parents who raised an ungrateful child. Maybe they'll tell themselves, I'm the villain in this story. I don't really care anymore. I'm 24 years old. I have a good job, a decent apartment, money in the bank. I have friends who actually care about me. I have a future I built myself, with no ledger, no debt, no one keeping score, and Robert and Linda have exactly what they earned. Sometimes I think about that morning when I was 19, watching Linda count my money at the kitchen table. How powerless I felt. How small. I'm not small anymore, and that's the only victory that matters.